He offered me the life of my dreams, but only to use me in a multi-million-dollar scheme. They say find a job you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. Bullshit. You'll work twice as hard because now it's personal. That's what I learned after 15 years under the hoods of everything from beat-up Hondas to pristine Porsches. My name's Jack Mitchell, and I run a one-man operation out of a rented garage on the industrial side of town. Not the prettiest setup, but it's mine. Well, technically it belongs to my landlord, who reminds me about rent every 20th like clockwork, but you get the idea. I call it purgatory for rusty souls because that's what it is, a place where broken things come to either find salvation or accept their fate as scrap metal. My own ride, a 1997 Ford F-150 with more miles than a space shuttle, sits in the corner like a faithful dog with arthritis. Every morning it reminds me that even reliability has an expiration date. The check engine light's been on so long, I consider a feature, not a bug. But she starts every time, and in this business, consistency beats flash any day of the week. That particular Tuesday started like any other. Coffee that could strip paint, a transmission rebuild for Mrs. Henderson's Camry, and an oil change for the local pizza joint's delivery fleet. By 6 p.m., I was ready to call it quits. The October air had that bite to it that makes you think about things, mortgage payments you don't have, retirement funds that exist only in theory, the American dream that feels more like a subscription service you can't quite afford. The drive home takes me down Route 47, a stretch of asphalt that the county forgot existed about a decade ago. No streetlights, no cell towers for miles, just you and whatever thoughts you're trying to outrun. That's when I saw her. Not the woman. The car, a 1965 Shelby Cobra, painted in that specific shade of blue that makes grown men weep, racing stripes white as fresh snow. She was pulled over on the shoulder, hazards blinking like a distress signal from another era. Standing beside it was a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine I couldn't afford to subscribe to. Designer dress, heels that had no business being on a gravel shoulder, and an expression somewhere between frustration and amusement. Every instinct told me to keep driving. No good deed goes unpunished. That's practically the 11th commandment in my family. But looking at that Cobra suffering on a roadside felt like watching the Mona Lisa being used as a placemat. Some things transcend common sense. I pulled over about 50 feet ahead and walked back. She watched me approach with the cautious interest of someone calculating odds. Can't blame her. Stranger on a dark road. Classic setup for a true crime podcast. I kept my hands visible, moved slow, the way you approach a spooked horse. She spoke first, which surprised me. Most people in her tax bracket wait for you to announce yourself like you're entering a throne room. Asked what the problem was, then mentioned her father thinking the car should be locked away. How she just wanted to feel free for an hour. Escaped, she said, like the car was a prison and she was doing time in luxury. The irony wasn't lost on me. Most people dream of having problems like hers. The Cobra's engine was purring wrong, that distinctive knock that tells you something's not getting what it needs. Fuel pump, most likely. These old beauties are temperamental about modern gas, especially if they've been sitting in some climate-controlled garage being treated like museum pieces instead of the road warriors they were born to be. I introduced myself while working Jack Mitchell like it mattered. 20 minutes later, I had her running smooth again. Temporary fix with some fuel line adjustments, and a prayer to the patron saint of vintage automobiles. When she asked what she owed me, I waved her off. This was about respect for the machine, not money. That's when things got interesting. She insisted on taking my number, said something about her father believing in paying for competence, not just kindness. The way she phrased it stuck with me. Calculated. Precise. She punched my number into her phone with manicured fingers, the screen lighting up her face in the darkness. Before she left, she called me a knight in oil-stained jeans and finally told me her name, Chloe. Wednesday came and went. Fixed a Suburban's AC. Diagnosed a mysterious rattle in a Civic that turned out to be a loose license plate frame. Thursday was more of the same. Life has a rhythm when you work with your hands. Problem, solution, invoice, repeat. Then Friday morning happened. Unknown number on my cell. while I was elbow deep in a Mustang's engine bay. I almost didn't answer. Usually it's someone trying to sell me an extended warranty for a car I don't own. But something made me pick up. Call it instinct. Call it the universe setting up its punchline. The voice on the other end was pure business school. Every word measured, weighted, delivered with the precision of a Swiss watch. She introduced herself as Sarah, said she represented the office of Marcus Sterling. The name hit me like ice water. Sterling Industries. The kind of money that doesn't just talk, it gives lectures at Harvard. Then she said it. He was Chloe's father. The girl with the cobra had a name that meant something now. Sarah wasn't calling to say thanks. Wasn't calling to verify I existed. Her voice, still perfectly professional, cut straight to the point. Mr. Mitchell, she said, Mr. Sterling values competence in unexpected situations. He would like to meet with you to discuss a business proposition. My mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Marcus Sterling wanted to discuss business with me. Me, a guy whose biggest business decision last month was whether to buy generic or name-brand brake pads. I stood there in my garage, phone still pressed against my ear even though Sarah had hung up 30 seconds ago. The dial tone hummed like a flat line. That weekend passed in a blur of overthinking and underprepared anxiety. I must have changed my mind about going 50 times. Googled Marcus Sterling until my search history looked like a stalker's manifesto. The man owned half the city skyline and probably had the other half on layaway. His business empire spanned everything from real estate to biotech, the kind of diversification that made economists write love letters. Monday morning came too fast, and not fast enough. I put on my only suit, bought it for my cousin's wedding 5 years ago. Still had the tags until that morning. The thing fit like a costume, like I was playing dress-up in my dad's clothes. But showing up to Sterling's office in my usual uniform of motor oil and denim didn't seem like a power move. The address Sarah gave me was for a building that scraped the belly of heaven. 47 floors of glass and steel ambition. The lobby alone cost more than I'd make in 3 lifetimes. Security guards who looked like they ate protein shakes for breakfast and small businesses for lunch. They had my name on a list, which felt surreal. Jack Mitchell, expected guest. Not delivery guy. Not maintenance. Guest. The elevator ride to the top floor took long enough for me to question every life choice that led to this moment. When those doors opened, I stepped into what I can only describe as a temple to capitalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that made you understand why rich people thought they were gods. They literally looked down on everyone else. Sarah materialized from nowhere, all sharp angles and sharper smile. She led me through hallways lined with art that belonged to museums, past assistants who typed with the intensity of bomb defusal experts. Everything whispered money, but the kind of money that didn't need to shout. Marcus Sterling's office made the rest of the floor look modest. The man himself stood behind a desk that could double as an aircraft carrier, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at his kingdom. When he turned, I understood why people followed him. Charisma rolled off him in waves. Salt and pepper hairstyle with mathematical precision. Suit that probably cost more than my truck, and eyes that calculated your worth before you finished saying hello. He didn't mention the roadside rescue. Didn't mention Chloe. Instead, he launched into a speech about value creation versus value consumption, about how rare it was to find someone who understood the soul of the machine. He'd done his homework, knew about every significant restoration I completed, every vintage engine I brought back from the dead. The man had a file on me thick enough to be a novel. Then came the offer. Not just a job, a complete life upgrade. He wanted me to oversee his private collection. 63 vehicles ranging from a 1936 Bugatti Type 57 to a 2019 McLaren Senna. The salary number he mentioned made me forget how to breathe for a second, but that wasn't even the kicker. He walked me over to a scale model on his bookshelf, a perfect replica of a colonial-style house. Beautiful thing. All white columns and black shutters, the kind of place that showed up in movies about the American dream. This, he said, comes with a position, part of the employment package. For security reasons, his insurance company insisted his collections curator live in a company-controlled property. Made it sound logical, like buying milk with cereal. The paperwork appeared as if summoned from thin air. Sarah sliding documents across the conference table with practiced precision. Employment contract NDA, and something called a $0 lease agreement. That last one made me pause. Marcus explained it like teaching a kid to tie shoes, patient, slightly condescending. The house remained part of their family trust, but I'd live there rent-free as part of my compensation. Tax advantages for everyone, he said. All perfectly legal, thoroughly vetted by lawyers who probably had lawyers. I signed. Of course I signed. You don't say no to winning the lottery because you're worried about the taxes. My hand shook slightly as I wrote my name, each letter feeling like a step towards something I couldn't quite see yet. Marcus smiled when I finished, the kind of smile a fisherman makes when the hook sets deep. His team would handle everything. He assured me. Movers would arrive tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. They'd pack my apartment, transport everything to the new house. All I had to do was show up to my new life. Efficient, sterile, the way rich people solve problems, by throwing money and logistics at them until they disappeared. That last night in my apartment hit different. I sat on my second-hand couch, drinking beer from a can, surrounded by boxes I didn't pack in a life I was about to leave behind. The walls held 15 years of memories. The burn mark from when I tried to fix a toaster and nearly torched the place. The patch job where my buddy Tommy put his fist through the drywall after his divorce. The good times and bad times layered like paint. Was I getting the opportunity of a lifetime or selling my soul to the devil? The question bounced around my skull, like a bearing in an empty hubcap. But poverty has a way of making philosophical debates feel like luxury items. I've been drowning in shallow water for so long. Someone offered me a yacht seemed like salvation, not suspicious. The movers came exactly at 8. Professional crew that worked like a choreographed dance, wrapping my mismatched furniture in blankets nicer than my bed sheets. They treated my possessions with more respect than I did, handling each box like it contained nuclear materials. By noon, my entire life fit into a truck heading across town to an address I'd only seen in photograph. The house exceeded the model's promise. 3 stories of architectural perfection, sitting on 2 acres of manicured landscape. The driveway alone was bigger than my old apartment. Walking through that front door felt like stepping into someone else's life, like I'd stolen another man's skin and was waiting for someone to notice the poor fit. My stuff looked ridiculous in those rooms, like bringing a hot dog to a 5-star restaurant. My recliner cowered in a living room that could host a wedding reception. My scratched coffee table apologized for its existence next to furniture that had pedigrees. Even my toolbox seemed embarrassed, tucked into a garage that was cleaner than most hospitals. The first few weeks blurred together in a haze of adjustment and automotive paradise. The collection exceeded every fantasy I'd ever had. Cars I'd only seen in magazines, now under my care. Each one a masterpiece of engineering and history. I threw myself into the work with religious fervor, documenting every detail, creating maintenance schedules that would make NASA jealous. But paradise has a way of showing its seams if you look close enough. Started with little things. Discrepancies in the documentation. Engine numbers that didn't match what was stamped on the blocks. When I brought it up to Marcus's people, they smiled the way you smile at a child asking why the sky is blue. Insurance formalities, they said. Technical requirements for tax purposes. Marcus trusts you to handle the real work. Don't worry about the paperwork. If you can't spot the mark in a con game, you're probably it. That wisdom from my grandfather started echoing in my head. But I pushed it down, buried it under the weight of my new salary and the beauty of those machines. Denial is a comfortable bed when you're tired of sleeping on the floor. 3 months in, I found something that made my chest tighten. In the garage, pushed behind a cabinet that hadn't been moved in years, was a tool kit. Beautiful old thing, leather case with brass corners. The kind mechanics passed down through generations. Engraved on the top, Evie someone's initials, someone who'd been here before me. The house started feeling different after that, like it was watching me. Sounds that old houses make became whispers of secrets. I began noticing things. Books on shelves I hadn't really looked at before. One caught my eye in what the movers had grandly called a library. Really just a room with built-in shelves I'd been using to store car manuals. Inside the front cover, written in feminine handwriting, "To Ethan, may this house always be our fortress. Love, Chloe." The date was 3 years ago. My blood turned antifreeze. Ethan, EV, the toolkit. This wasn't just a house. It was someone's home. Someone who wasn't here anymore. The office became my next obsession. Second floor, overlooking the backyard. Beautiful space with built-in cabinets and a massive mahogany desk that came with the house. Everything in that room screamed old money and established success. Except for one detail that had been nagging at me since day one. The top drawer of that desk was locked. No key anywhere. Most people would have left it alone. Most people aren't mechanics. We solve puzzles for a living, and locked things are just puzzles waiting for the right tool. I had a specialized set of extractors meant for broken car keys. Precision instruments that could grip and turn the smallest pieces of metal. Took me 3 nights of trying. But eventually, I heard that satisfying click. Inside was a photograph that changed everything. Chloe, looking genuinely happy, not the controlled smile I'd seen on the roadside. Next to her, a man about my age, maybe a few years younger. Handsome in that prep school way that suggested lacrosse and trust funds. They stood in front of this house, his arm around her waist, both of them glowing with the kind of happiness that makes other people believe in love again. My laptop was open before I fully processed what I was doing. Ethan Van Sterling. The search results came fast and brutal. Business journals, society pages, legal documents. The story assembled itself like a transmission coming together. Ethan Vance, married into the Sterling dynasty, started his own investment firm with backing from his father-in-law. Then, 2 years ago, everything collapsed. Bankruptcy filings, fraud allegations that never quite stuck, and Marcus Sterling emerging with all the assets, including, apparently, this house. The business journals painted it clean: a failed venture, an unfortunate market timing, a young man who reached beyond his grasp. But the society pages told a different story in their careful language and meaningful omissions. Ethan Vance disappeared from every event, every photo, every mention, like he'd been edited out of existence. I was sitting in a dead man's chair, in a dead man's house, living a life that had been surgically removed from someone else. The locked drawer hadn't been an oversight. It was a grave marker, the only thing in this house that remembered who used to live here. That evening, I was nursing a bourbon that cost more than I used to make in a day, trying to process what I'd learned when my phone rang. Unknown number. My new life had taught me that unknown numbers meant important people who assumed you'd answer. The voice on the other end sounded like exhaustion had taken human form. Quiet, measured, but with an undertone of desperation that reminded me of engines running on their last cylinder. He introduced himself with the same matter-of-fact tone you'd use to order coffee. "You're in my house," he said. "My name is Ethan Vance." The words hung between us like a confession at midnight. I asked how he got my number, some desperate attempt to buy time while my brain caught up to reality. His answer was simple. Mr. Henderson, the gardener who still worked the grounds, had been kind enough to find out who the new mechanic was. Henderson had been there for 20 years, had watched Ethan grow from ambitious son-in-law to discarded liability. Then Ethan said something that made every instinct I developed over 15 years of reading situations scream in alarm. "They didn't just take my business," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They're running a game, and you're the key piece. You're not their employee, Mr. Mitchell. You're their alibi." The word alibi hung in the air like exhaust fumes in a closed garage. Toxic, suffocating, and impossible to ignore. Ethan Vance wanted to meet. Tomorrow. A diner off Interstate 80. The kind of place where truckers and traveling salesmen ate breakfast at midnight and nobody asked questions. I agreed before my brain could talk me out of it. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in a bed worth more than my old annual salary, staring at a ceiling that someone else had called home, wondering how deep this rabbit hole went. The house felt different now, like finding out your friendly neighbor has bodies in the basement. Every creak became a warning, every shadow a threat. The diner looked exactly like you'd expect. Vinyl booths held together by duct tape and determination, coffee that could wake the dead, and a waitress who'd seen enough life to write a book but settled for refills instead. Ethan sat in the back corner, baseball cap pulled low, looking like a man who'd learned to become invisible. Up close, he was younger than I'd expected, maybe 32, 33, but his eyes belonged to someone who'd lived through a war. He ordered coffee black and got straight to the point. Marcus Sterling hadn't just taken his business. He'd orchestrated its destruction, planted evidence of embezzlement, manipulated contracts, turned partners into witnesses, the kind of corporate assassination that left no fingerprints. But the business was just the appetizer. The main course was insurance fraud on a scale that made my head spin. Those cars in Marcus's collection, half of them existed only on paper. The real vehicles were sold overseas, replaced with convincing fakes or cars with swap VIN numbers. The insurance policies, however, were written for the originals. One convenient fire, one stage theft, and Marcus would collect millions. That's where I came in. My signature on maintenance reports, my reputation as an honest mechanic who'd never lie about a car's authenticity. I was a guarantee that made the whole scheme work. The insurance companies would never question documentation from Jack Mitchell, the guy who once returned a customer's forgotten cash he'd found under a floor mat. They'd done their research. They knew exactly what kind of mark I'd make. Ethan slid a flash drive across the table, small enough to disappear in my palm. Everything he'd gathered before Marcus destroyed him. Account numbers, doctored documents, recorded conversations. Not enough to convict on its own, but with my access to the current operation, we could build a case that would stick like superglue. I asked the obvious question, why not just go to the FBI himself? His laugh had no humor in it. Marcus owned judges, had prosecutors on speed dial, and treated law enforcement like a subscription service. Without someone on the inside, someone with current evidence, Ethan was just a bitter ex-son-in-law with an axe to grind. But me? I was credible. I was the missing piece. The smart play was to walk away, take my savings, disappear to some small town where the biggest crime was jaywalking, and forget I'd ever heard the name Sterling. But sitting there, looking at this broken man who'd lost everything to a predator in a $1,000 suit, I kept thinking about all the honest people Marcus had probably destroyed, all the lives crushed under the weight of his greed. Sometimes doing the right thing is the stupidest thing you can do. But if you can't look at yourself in the mirror, what's the point of having indoor plumbing? I took the flash drive, felt its weight despite weighing less than a spark plug, and made a choice that would either save my soul or end my life. Maybe both. The drive back to the house, Ethan's house, I had to keep reminding myself, felt like driving toward a cliff with my eyes open. But I needed to see something first, needed to touch base with who I used to be before I decided who I was going to become. My old garage sat empty now. The landlord hadn't found a new tenant yet. I still had a key. Figured I'd return it eventually when I got around to it. The place smelled the same, motor oil, metal shavings, and that particular mix of grease and hope that every mechanic knows. I stood there in the dark, breathing it in, remembering when my biggest worry was making rent and my greatest joy was bringing dead engines back to life. Simple times, honest times. Times when I knew exactly who I was and what I stood for. The garage didn't judge, didn't ask why I was there at midnight, looking like a man attending his own funeral. It just existed, solid and real, a reminder that once upon a time I'd built something with my own hands that nobody could take away, even if I'd walked away from it myself. I stayed maybe 10 minutes, long enough to remember, not long enough to change my mind. Then I locked up, slipped the key under the door, and drove back to my borrowed life, knowing I was about to burn it all down. The next 3 months were an education in paranoia. I played my part during the day, the grateful employee, the dedicated curator, the man who'd won the lottery and knew it. But nights were for documenting everything. Every discrepancy, every falsified record, every impossible restoration that existed only in insurance paperwork. I photographed, scanned, copied, and created a paper trail that would make accountants weep with joy. The cars were the easy part. A 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB that was actually a kit car with real Ferrari badges. A Bugatti Type 35 that had more reproduction parts than original. A collection of Shelby Cobras that were brilliant replicas. Good enough to fool anyone who didn't know to check the frame welds from underneath. Marcus was smart. He kept just enough real cars to maintain credibility, rotating them through shows and exhibitions while the fakes sat in storage, insured to the hilt. Chloe visited once during those months. Arrived in a Tesla, which seemed wrong somehow, like seeing a samurai with a lightsaber. She walked through the garage with the confidence of someone who'd grown up around expensive things, but her eyes kept drifting to the corners, the shadows, like she was looking for something, or someone. She mentioned how pleased her father was with my work, how he hadn't been this relaxed in years. The way she said it, with just a hint of something, sadness, warning, made me wonder what she knew, what she'd seen, whether she was complicit or another victim. She touched the hood of the fake Ferrari, and for just a second, her smile flickered like a bad connection. Before she left, she stopped at the door and looked back at me, said her father valued loyalty above all else, that he'd do anything for people who were truly loyal to him. But the way she emphasized anything made it sound less like a promise and more like a threat wrapped in silk. 2 weeks later, Marcus paid a surprise visit. Found me under a Lamborghini Miura, doing legitimate maintenance on one of the few legitimate cars. He waited until I rolled out, then helped me to my feet with a grip that lingered just a second too long. Strong hands for a man who probably hadn't changed his own oil in 30 years. He walked me through the collection, talking about each car like they were his children. The pride in his voice was real, which was a disturbing part. He believed his own lies so completely that truth became negotiable. We stopped at the Ferrari, the fake one Chloe had touched, and he ran his hand along the same spot. That's when he said it. Started talking about how these machines demanded complete dedication, total loyalty, how they could sense betrayal, respond to it. His hand moved to my shoulder, squeezed with pressure that wasn't quite painful but wasn't quite friendly either. He hoped I appreciated what I had, he said, because everything he gave he could take away, and maybe a little more. The threat was elegant in its simplicity. No raised voice, no dramatic gestures. Just a man standing in a garage full of lies, telling me in the politest way possible that he would destroy me if I crossed him. I managed to nod, managed to say something about understanding completely, managed not to throw up until after he left. That night, I met Ethan one last time, handed over everything I had gathered, 3 months of evidence that would make prosecutors dance like it was Christmas morning. He took it with hands that shook slightly, the first real emotion I'd seen from him since that night in the diner. We both knew what would happen next. The investigation would take time, but once it started, Marcus's empire would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. The FBI raid came 3 weeks later. Tuesday morning, 6 a.m., the kind of wake-up call that changes everything. They swept through the house, the garage, the offices, with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. I played confused employee, answered questions with just enough truth to be helpful, and watched my new life get wrapped in evidence tape. Marcus's arrest made headlines that even people who didn't read business news couldn't ignore. The investigation uncovered more than just insurance fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, bribery, the kind of charges that turned millionaires into inmates. His lawyers, the best money could buy, couldn't buy their way out of the paper trail I'd helped create. I lost everything, of course. The job evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked. The house was seized as evidence. Even my old F-150, which I'd been slowly restoring in Marcus's garage, got caught up in the asset freeze. They said it had been worked on with company tools. Made it part of the investigation. Legal logic that made sense to lawyers and nobody else. For 6 months, I lived in a studio apartment that made my old place look luxurious. Worked at a chain oil change shop, where the highlight of my day was not getting yelled at by customers who thought I was personally responsible for gas prices. The newspapers called me a hero, a whistleblower, the honest mechanic who brought down a giant. But heroes don't usually end up checking tire pressure for minimum wage. The trial was pure theater. Marcus in an orange jumpsuit that cost more than most people's suits, maintaining his innocence with the conviction of someone who'd never been told no. Chloe testified for prosecution. Carve her father up with surgical precision. Turns out she'd known everything, had been gathering her own evidence, waiting for someone brave or stupid enough to light the match. She looked at me once during her testimony, a quick nod that might have been thanks or apology or both. After the verdict, guilty on all counts, 15 to 20 years, Ethan found me at the shop. Looked different, healthier, like someone had uninvented stress just for him. He waited until my shift ended, then offered to buy me coffee at a place that didn't have vinyl booze or fluorescent lights. His assets were still frozen, would be for years while lawyers sorted through the wreckage. But my name, he said, had become something valuable. The mechanic who couldn't be bought. The guy who chose right over rich. Every collector, every vintage car owner, every insurance company in the country knew who Jack Mitchell was now, and they trusted me. He had a proposition. Use my name, my reputation, to secure a business loan. He had the business plan, the connections, the knowledge. I had the credibility. Together, we could build something honest in a field full of forgeries. 50-50 partners. Clean books. Real restorations. A chance to do what we loved without looking over our shoulders. V&M Restoration opened 6 months later in a converted warehouse on a legitimate side of town. Not fancy, but real. Solid. Ours. The first week, we had more calls than we could handle. Turns out, people really wanted their cars fixed by someone they could trust. Novel concept in modern business. The surprise came when Ethan led me to the back of the shop that first day. There, covered by a tarp like a birthday present, was my F-150. He'd managed to get it released from evidence, claimed it as abandoned property or some legal magic I didn't understand. It had been fully restored while I wasn't looking, new paint, rebuilt engine, interior that didn't smell like 20 years of fast food and regret. Ethan mentioned, casual as discussing the weather, that Chloe had testified against her father, got immunity in exchange for her cooperation. Last he heard, she'd moved to Seattle or Portland, somewhere with rain and coffee, started over with a new name and old money that the government couldn't touch. He said it like it didn't matter, but I caught him looking at that restored truck, and I knew who'd really paid for it. A year later, we're still in business, still honest, still fixing cars for people who appreciate craftsmanship over convenience. The phone rings constantly now. Word of mouth is better than any advertising when your reputation is the product. Ethan handles the books, I handle the engines, and somehow we built something that neither Marcus Sterling nor the federal government could take away. We're sitting in the office, going over the week's schedule, when Ethan mentions the phone hasn't stopped ringing. Everyone wants the honest mechanic, he says with a grin that makes him look like the man he probably was before Marcus Sterling happened to him. I tell him to let them know we charge by the hour, and we actually bill for it. Revolutionary concept. Charging what your work is worth and delivering what you promise. My phone buzzes. Text message. Photo of a woman standing next to a broken-down classic Mustang. Somewhere on what looks like Route 47. The same stretch where this all started. She's asking if we make house calls. I show it to Ethan, and we both know what I'm going to do. Some habits die hard, and helping stranded motorists is apparently one of mine. I answer the phone with our company name. Professional now, legitimate. Tell her we can help. Take down the address. Ethan's already grabbing the toolkit, the good one with our logo on it. As we head out, I catch myself thinking about how this whole thing started with a good deed that was supposed to be punished. Turns out, some good deeds do go unpunished, especially when you've got business cards.